Welcome to the Real Recovery Show. I'm obviously not Lisa Trevino. I'm Tay Singer, and I'll be discussing today's topic. I've been on the show before, doing different topics with like EMDR and brain spotting and the LGBTQ episode. Lisa really feels this episode is more for me, and there's a really good reason why. I've been in long-term recovery, as we've discussed before. I have over 15 years, and in 2008, I was working for a bookstore in town called Genesis, which was like the recovery store is now, but it was the bookstore at the time. And we were doing some different book signings, and one of the people that came through our store was Jennifer Storm, who had just come out with her first book, Blackout Girl. And I remember reading it in early recovery and just feeling like for the first time somebody like understood what I was talking about and going through and had experienced in life. And it was just a really refreshing thing for me to do. And she came to the book signing, and then she was like super sweet and not like all like celebrity and stuff. And it's actually kind of funny because a few months ago I pulled out the book to read it again and just refamiliarize myself with it. And and she had signed in it, "Good luck with your writing, love and respect, Jennifer." And I didn't even remember telling her I was a writer. So it was just really funny. And so I was actually thinking about like, now I do write professionally. And so it's all technical writing and not fun like writing books. But like, it's just really interesting to like see like so many years later that something that was written in a book was, influenced me more than I realized. And she's come out with two new books. One is Awakening Blackout Girl, and then she kind of redid the original Blackout Girl. And so we're going to talk to Jennifer Storm today. She's on with us, and I'm so excited that you're here. It's crazy that it's been like 15 years since we've seen each other, but I know that you've also kind of kept in touch over the years here and there. I remember when October 1st happened, you were one of the first people that contacted me and was like, "Are you okay? Like, how's everything doing?" And it was just really like, it like warmed my heart that you would even think about me that many years later. And so, yeah, so what are you up to? What's the book's about? Like, what's life like? Let's get into it.
Small topics. Well, hi, and it's so good to see you.
You too.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation with you and love to see what you've done and that you're still in recovery and still kind of doing this great work. So yeah, life is good. There's been a lot of ups and downs, I think, like everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, so I wrote Blackout Girl obviously in 2008. So it was published back then, and did an extensive tour with it. Did a lot of speaking. It was really like this wonderful catalyst that helped me really find my voice, not just as a person in long-term recovery, but as a survivor of sexual violence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I really started making those connections, that I wasn't alone, and there were so many other people out there who were struggling with their own trauma around their sexual violence, and then that connection to this like really common coping mechanism that 90 some percent of us turn to, and that's substances.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's drugs, alcohol, sometimes it's food. Predominantly we're talking drugs and alcohol. And as I was traveling across the country and meeting survivors and talking to people, first of all, I never went to an event where I didn't have at least one person come up to me and disclose their sexual violence for the first time.
Right.
And that was always just like this incredible honor, and such a huge, like it felt like such a huge responsibility to receive that information and then be able to resource that person in a way that felt, hopeful and healing. So there's such a connection between the two that my work started to really center around that. My story, if you kind of want me to go back and talk
Absolutely.
about it a
Yeah.
little bit. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a pretty decent home. I had a nuclear family. For the most part, we were well off ish. We did pretty well. I was a straight A student. I was a cheerleader. I was, really academically into my schoolwork. And then I was raped at age 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this pivotal event that just literally shattered everything about my life. I often say if like you have a pane of glass in front of you and it shows you a picture of what your life looks like, that single event just smashed that picture all over the floor. And I was walking among the ruins and just getting cut every way I turned. This was in the 80s. This was 1987. We did not have a lot of advocates. We certainly did not have the level of awareness that we have today about sexual violence, did not have the resources. Both my parents came from alcoholic abusive homes. They both suffered trauma in their own respects. My father was a Vietnam vet, first infantry, so he had significant PTSD, and he grew up in a horrifically violent alcoholic home. Same with my mom. So they both had all this untreated trauma that they were walking around with. And so when this thing happened to me, a couple things happened. It cracked open our family in a way that I held onto for a really long time as like my responsibility and my fault. We were never really big emotional talkers as a family anyway, and it got worse after this happened. It's like everyone just fell silent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I think it was really centered around my parents didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know how to respond to me. And I think what happened to me, what I know now, biologically and neurologically, what I know about trauma is it brought their trauma up right in their face. And so I feel like I became like this walking version of this untreated wound that they both had within each other.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly I watched their marriage kind of fall apart. I mean, and it was already doing that, but it really accelerated after this. I watched my brothers kind of splinter off. I had two older brothers. I had really never drank up until that point. And so I started drinking because alcohol felt like an escape. It kind of quelled that pain that I was having. And I didn't drink like a normal person. I drank,
Mm-hmm.
alcoholically from the minute I picked up. I never could just pick up one drink and be done. I would pick up one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 20 till I blacked out. So it's not a coincidence that the title of my book is Blackout Girl, because that's
Yeah.
that's who I became. I didn't drink to just be social. I drank to get inebriated. I drank to forget. I drank to fill this gaping wound that I had inside me. Because of that kind of blackout factor, though, and being a survivor of sexual violence, that put me in a lot of really vulnerable places that led to then more violence. And so what I was seeking was an escape. But what ended up happening was I'd get that escape, and then sometimes it came with like a dose of harm or a dose of trauma, right? So I really wanted to figure out a way to continue to use, but not black out. And
Mm-hmm.
so this started at 12, someone introduced me to cocaine at 15, and I started using that. And that substance allowed me to not black out. So
Mm-hmm.
I could drink as much as I wanted to, because drinking was always my primary addiction. And then if I did cocaine, I would remain in control of my body, which I realize kind of sounds a little counterintuitive because clearly I was, inebriated, but in a different way. I wouldn't lose time, I wouldn't lose memory, and I had control of this. And so that became a really codependent kind of combination for me. And if I drank, I immediately then sought the cocaine because I had this great fear that if I didn't, I was going to black out and then somebody might try to rape me again or harm me again. So I was cocaine addicted at 15, and right after the assaults. So the perpetrator in my case was somebody I didn't know. He was much, much older than I was. He was in his late 20s. He was arrested. I had to go, testify, did all of that. And I attempted to kill myself for the first time a couple months after that. It was right when I had turned 13. And it wasn't that I was trying to kill myself. I was just trying to kill the pain. I didn't know what to do. Nobody was talking to me. I had no safe space to say, like, this happened and I don't know what to do. And I'm hurting and I'm suffering. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the words. And no one around me had the language or the words. So everyone just pretended like it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So there was no acknowledgement. Like, I never had like anyone just like hug me and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you." Like,
Right.
this must be really hard for you. Like, there was just no acknowledgement that this massive, pivotal, life altering thing happened to me. And then after that, other events, right? And so my life just spiraled. I was barely attending school, barely. I was skating through grades. Um, I couldn't sit still in class long enough to absorb knowledge, let alone interact. I had PTSD. I didn't know it at the time. I couldn't sleep. I had horrible insomnia. I was writing really morbid poetry at the time, which was a good avenue to kind of get that darkness out of me. So writing has always been really important to me. I mean, I have the first book that I ever wrote when I think I was in fourth grade.
Hmm.
I got an A on it, obviously. But I still have it. Like I have it in my like little,
Yeah.
archives of stuff from my childhood. Yeah, I just began to spiral and my addiction got worse and worse. And as you know, the more we drink, the more we drink, the more we drink, the more you use, the more you use.
Yeah.
And, when you're using to cover up trauma and then you're also collecting trauma as you're doing that, you just become this massive snowball of trauma and dysfunction. And that's what I kind of became. And
Yeah.
I didn't know how to get out of it. Um, I
Some
eventually
some
did
interesting
graduate.
things I
Yeah.
think though from your story. I mean, because I've read all of your books multiple times now. um, so like with that first trauma and then trying to kill yourself afterwards, you were trying to use the pills that your mom said she had to take because of you, and that really hit me. Um, Lisa usually is the host of the show, and she has a lot of like same experiences with you in her life with like that parent situation where her mom would say stuff to her that was like awful, and she owned it, and like you were owning these pills, and you weren't even really sure what. Like you said, you weren't sure you wanted to kill yourself, but you were trying to kill yourself. And that's not the only time you tried to kill yourself that you're like, I didn't really want to die. Like,
Yeah.
so it's just really interesting. And it's not the only sexual assault either.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The connection with my mom. So my mom had a lot of untreated trauma, and I
Mm.
was the third child. I don't think she wanted a third child. My dad was the one that
Mm.
really pushed for a girl. He really wanted a girl, and they got me. But my birth was kind of traumatic. I jokingly, I think I say in the book that I came into the world, a mess, and I just kind of continued that way. My mom literally had no contractions, was laying in bed one night and went into labor, and I was out within like minutes.
Yeah.
And so it was traumatic for her. We were both rushed to the hospital, and we were separated for a good chunk of I want to say it was like a week or so.
Mm.
So we didn't have that like bonding time that I think mother and child need to have right away because
Right.
she was recovering, I was recovering.
And it was the
And
70s, so things weren't as
yes,
like things weren't as quick as they are now as far as the
exactly.
recoveries go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And there wasn't that fundamental understanding of that connection, like the skin to skin connection and the
Hmm.
importance of that with your mom and your child. So, and that was also when a doctor prescribed my mom Valium and
Hmm.
said, you're going to need this for your nerves because she was really shook up. Now, was that also probably indicative of her personality and her trying to conceal her own trauma? Sure.
Yeah.
I try really hard not to totally psychoanalyze my mom, but I also have because
Right.
you have to kind of go down the rabbit hole of your history to understand your present. So she used to always tell me, "Oh, I take this pill every day because of my nerves." And I remember always thinking like, "But I'm like 8, I'm 9, I'm 10, I'm 11, I'm 12, so I'm still like getting on your nerves." That was the
Right.
message.
Yeah.
That was the message I got. She was not loving to me. She was incredibly judgmental,
Right.
very verbally abusive. I could never do anything right. I never looked good enough. I never said the right things. It was really damaging to my self-esteem. I
Hmm.
suffered an eating disorder before my addiction came along, just because I never felt good enough for her.
Yeah.
And yet she was my mom. So I sought her love and affection just like I sought drugs.
And
So it was,
those were like original addictions though, like the eating disorder and like,
yes,
the seeking of somebody's love and acceptance and all that kind of stuff. Those were your first addictions. Those were before you even blocked out that first time at 12 years old.
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was already trying to escape in a way. And and I guess trying to control too and understand. So yeah, it wasn't a coincidence that when I attempted to take my life that night, I had grabbed a bottle of peach schnapps because again, this was the 80s. Liquor cabinets in the home were totally accessible and stocked.
Yeah.
And I drank the whole thing, and I took an entire bottle of her Valium. And then my grandmother's blood pressure pills were there. So I just like kind of took 30 of them for good order too. I think it was 15 of 30 of the other, which is, a lethal combination. And it was really the blood pressure medication that almost killed me. Uh,
Mm,
so I had to have my stomach pumped. I was in the ICU. I flatlined in front of my parents at one point, and that was really when the blood pressure pills kicked in.
gotcha.
So it was incredibly traumatic for them, and for myself. And I ended up spending the summer leading up to seventh grade in a psych ward in Lehigh Valley that was not age appropriate,
Mm,
that was not trauma informed, and it was horrific. It was the stuff that you see in, not great movies like Girl Interrupted and places like that. Like,
right.
it didn't help at all. Like,
Well,
it hurt.
didn't you actually learn self-mutilation there?
Yeah, that's exactly where I learned self mutilation. Absolutely, because my roommate was doing it, and I was like, oh well, that might work. Let me try that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I learned how to lie skillfully to professionals
Right.
and to adults, so that they would think I'm okay and then leave me alone, even though there weren't that many adults asking me if I was okay anyway.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So yeah, so after your assault and you're starting to get into drugs, what happens next?
Just continued chaos.
Yeah.
I kept barely advancing to the next grade. I failed seventh grade, ninth grade, and 11th grade. So I had to take summer school. So I always did what I needed to do to like get to that next grade. I watched my oldest brother graduate, but then he was heavy, heavy into drugs and alcohol. And then
Mm,
my other brother dropped out of school and was heavy into drugs and alcohol. And I knew I wanted to graduate. And honestly, back then, like, I just think the teachers just wanted to get me out of there. So they
right.
let me kind of do what I needed to do. And I barely showed up. And I just kept doing more drugs. Like, it started with pills, then it went to marijuana, then it went to LSD, then it went to cocaine. And eventually it went to crack cocaine.
Which is one of the most impactful lines in your book. I was addicted before I exhaled.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. Yeah.
I actually had a roommate years ago that had that tattooed on her ribs
Are
from
you
your book.
serious? Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I didn't know. I thought I had told you that story.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I mean, what had happened was, so I also had a series of losses. I had a lot of death in my life.
Yeah.
Lost a lot of friends. Like, my best friend killed herself at 15. A childhood friend of mine died in this like freak accident when we were 10. So like from 10 on, probably every year, someone I knew died.
But you kind of
And
blamed yourself for Alex's death because you
I
thought that
did.
you could have
I
fixed
did.
it.
I did. Yeah. I mean, so what oftentimes happens when someone chooses to end their life, though, those of us that are around them, we analyze everything. What did we say?
Hmm.
What did we do? What could we have done? And she had called me, like, I think it was like a week before that, to let me know that she wanted to run away. And she wanted to take her dad's gun. She wanted me to go with her. And she had a very similar history as I did. And so I understood that. And I talked to her and talked to her and talked to her and talked to her. And I thought, by the time we hung up, she was in a good space. And a couple days later, then I saw her at school, and we were just coming off of being grounded because we were always getting in trouble. And she was gonna sleep over my house that night, and I was all excited. And she was in a great mood at school. Like, I, saw her. She gave me a necklace, and
Hmm.
did say something cryptic that, in hindsight, she just said, "Well, here's something to never forget me.
Hmm.
So you'll never forget me." And it didn't click in the moment. I was just like, "Oh, this is just Michelle, and she's just being sweet."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that a couple hours later, after we got home from school, and like I was getting ready for the sleepover, we got an alert on a scanner. A friend of mine got an alert on a scanner and came rushing into my house and said there was a shooting on Sleepy Hollow Drive. And she was like one of the only houses there. And I just
Mm,
immediately knew it was her. And so my dad and I jumped in the car and we went. Of course, there was crime scene tape everywhere, and
right.
they let us know that she had shot herself in front of her dad.
Yeah. And that was one of the like more impactful ones, but there was a series of them, and that didn't just affect you, that affected your brother too, because you
Yeah,
guys are
my
so
brother had
close in,
dated
yeah.
her.
And you guys are so close in age, and like my sister
Yeah.
and I are we're she's a year and 4 months older than me, so like there was a lot of like that, like sharing of friends, and like I would date her friends, and like I totally get all that. So there was a lot of trauma, but you've really taken all of these negative things and you've used them for something positive. It's interesting reading your new version of Blackout Girl, because in the beginning of it, it talks about you being a victim advocate, and it actually talks about the Bill Cosby trials, which hadn't happened in the first book. So it was just
Yeah.
really interesting to like hear some of the things that you're doing now. So like what kind of things would you say are the things that you're working on most right now that you want to let people know about and be a part of and that sort of thing?
Well, one of the reasons we republished the book, so I have the worst timing ever in publication history. When we first published Blackout Girl, it was right when we had the economic recession.
Right.
So,
2008.
right,
Yes, it was.
before that, leading up to the book, we were like, there was going to be a robust marketing plan. I was going to do this. And then we had the economic recession. And the book still did incredibly well. And then, the Me Too movement hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been already a victim advocate. I'd already been working on these cases. I mean, the original, and I still love the original opening of Blackout Girl. And we did change it because it was outdated, but it broke my heart a little bit because I absolutely loved that
Yeah.
opening. And so, since that time, I had worked with so many victims of sexual violence, and my focus had really been on, victims of sexual violence who are using substances to cope. Because I knew it was just such a vast amount of folks and nobody was talking about it. So I
Mm-hmm.
approached Hazelton. I said, we really need to put this book back out there. We need to update it. We need to talk about the Me Too movement. Let me talk about this, huge problem that we're not talking about. What was so amazing about the Me Too movement is that it created this massive conversation around sexual violence. And so many survivors came forward and broke their silence and disclosed. And that was beautiful. And they had no real resources to then turn to. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like we ripped open millions of wounds across America and then said, see ya. And to me, that was really harmful. And so I wanted to make sure I was putting out content that spoke to that helped folks. So put out Blackout Girl, and then I had said to Hazelden, I have another memoir in me, and it's really more about my healing and my recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they agreed to publish that. So those two came out in October of 2020,
Yeah.
height of COVID.
Yeah.
So
I know
I
because
like
we actually had planned on like maybe doing something and then like it didn't happen.
I
Like,
was going on tour. I ended up going on tour from this chair, and
yeah.
so it really impacted my ability to get the word out about the book and for me to really kind of travel with it, which was pretty unfortunate. I'm really proud of Awakening Blackout Girl. It is really kind of how I've maintained recovery. I've been in long-term recovery for 25 years now. I just celebrated
Yeah.
25
That's
years in
amazing.
November. Thank you.
Congratulations.
And I don't think we talk enough about how do you sustain and maintain recovery. I think we love to hear the horror stories. We love to like hear about all the trauma, and then we don't always tilt towards the solution and
Mm-hmm.
how do you live in that solution and what does that look like. And so that's really what Awakening is about. It's
Yeah.
about living life on life's terms, and then really offering concrete methods for other survivors and people who are looking for recovery to access so that they can find that recovery too. So there's exercises in there, there's meditations, there's mantras. And what I've done since I couldn't tour with it, I created a 10-week curriculum based off of the book.
Oh, cool.
So what I really did was I took out, what I thought were the 10 core concepts, and I created a curriculum that I am slowly kind of putting out into the world. I piloted it in Pittsburgh with the Center for Victims of Crime in Pittsburgh, this amazing crime victim center there. And then I was just in Maine with their mental health services and sexual assault coalition, and we just ran a group there.
Oh, that's
So I'm,
awesome.
kind of getting it out there. I'm about to probably launch one just by myself that I do. So I'm just starting. I actually just put stuff on social media today to try to get folks interested. But I think it's what I've gotten so far from the feedback is that it has really, really helped. It has allowed folks to process their trauma, to identify their trauma in a really
Mm-hmm.
safe environment. And then slowly, it's really not about abstinence or anything like that. Like it's not, it's really about like, these are the coping mechanisms that you're using. and they're not helpful, right? Or they're harmful and they're destructive in your life. So here are some new alternative coping mechanisms to tilt towards to try to mitigate some of that harm. And so far, the outpouring has been phenomenal, and
That's
I'm really
awesome.
excited about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome. I'd love
there
to
isn't
see
a
it.
curriculum like that out there. There's
Yeah.
nothing that's that pinpointed. Yeah.
Yeah, that I'd love to be a part of that. So let me know more information. I'm definitely down. We're gonna go on a break. So the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them. They and do not represent any 12-step program and should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. And we'll see you after the break. Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show. I'm still not Lisa, but we're still doing the episode with Jennifer Storm. You can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV. Listen to us on the PHLV radio app or get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. So before the break, we're talking to Jennifer Storm about her books, her life, some of the advocacy work she does. A couple more things I want to talk about from your story. So we recently did an LGBTQ episode for LGBTQ in radio or in recovery. And we had a few people in recovery that are part of the LGBT community, as well as Lisa and I, where we actually talked about for the first time publicly that we're together. And so it was just interesting to me because as I'm rereading your book, which I mean, over a decade later. So when I got sober, I was only 24. I didn't really know who I was, what I wanted, any of those kinds of things. But I remember reading your book and, like I said earlier, relating to a lot of different things. And rereading your book in the last couple months, you talk a lot about your sexuality and about always being attracted to women or girls as a kid and then women as older, and some of those experiences. And about and it's interesting to me because I feel like in recovery we get to learn who we are and what we love. And when you take away the drug, you really get to see what feelings are because you're not numbing all the time anymore. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that, especially because you did have some more negative experiences earlier in life when it comes to this.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I was queer when I was in kindergarten, which I think is, people say kindergarten. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon. I have a 7-year-old son and he already has girlfriends and he did as early as kindergarten. It's not abnormal for children to begin to understand and explore their identity at that age. And, you like people. And
Mm-hmm.
I always liked girls. Like that felt really normal to me. And so, my first time trying to like really express that was in fourth grade, and I made these twin girls in my class my Valentines because we were asked to pick somebody in class and make them your Valentine. And we all had like these folders in the front of the class and we were supposed to put Valentines in there. Well, I was obsessed with Sweet Valley Twins and Sweet Valley High at that time. And so there were twins in my classroom, and obviously I was maybe a little arrogant in the love department. I don't know, but I looked at these twins, and so I wrote them Valentines. But what I would do is I would write them poems and put them in their folder when nobody was looking. And so they kept getting them, and like everyone would gather around, and it was like this thing that people were like, "Oh, who's your secret admirer?" and la la la. And one day the teacher, Miss Jackson, saw me doing it, saw me putting them in there. And I mean, she yanked me out of that class and just went off on me, basically. Told me that it was completely inappropriate what I was doing, that this was not normal. You are not to do this. And it was really scary and traumatizing to me because I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is just, it just felt so natural to me. And then I had another really negative experience with one of my best friends, one of my closest friends. And, we clearly both had feelings for each other. And this was right around when Dirty Dancing came out. And so we would do the dances and we would, give each other massages. And this was when I was in my teenage years. So much more age appropriate to be, kind of exploring in those ways. And she had really religious parents. And her dad walked in on us the one time. And I think we were Dirty Dancing. I'm almost positive. And he just like started screaming at me, chased me out of his house, was calling me a lesbian. I didn't even know what that was. So based on those kind of two experiences, I kind of decided, okay, whatever this is, I don't want it. I don't want to be it. I want to be normal. I don't want to be a lesbian, whatever that is. And so I just started to kind of like go with the flow, and I started to like boys and do what, what I thought I was supposed to do. And then after I was assaulted, I also had this really dysfunctional understanding of affection and sex. I didn't know. I didn't know anything. I had never really had sex ed prior to that. And then like my first experience is a rape. And so I was all messed up. And like most survivors, which this is a real kind of myth among our communities, is that I became really promiscuous and I sought out the attention and affection of guys. And it wasn't because like I was boy obsessed or I was a slut or any of that. It's just that was what I knew that's how I felt like seen.
Right.
As dysfunctional as that is, it's a very common coping mechanism for survivors. You're either like totally turned off by sex or you go right into it because it's become this thing in your life. But I still always knew like in the back of my head, like this, I don't like this. I don't really like guys. I kind of went through the motions. And it was funny. It wasn't until I started dating this one guy who has a whole chapter in the book because he was that impactful in my life. He's the one that was like, "You're gay." Like, I was like, "What do you mean? I'm your girlfriend." And he's like, "No, like you definitely, you like women. You're attracted to women. And if we ever break up, I guarantee you, you're going to be with women." And I was just like, no, whatever. But it did start to really have me thinking. But again, I kept it to myself. There was one time where I think I was making out with my best friend at a club and my brothers told my mom and she called me and just like read me the riot act, told me I was disgusting. And so all this messaging was really, really negative. So it became one of the reasons I used, right? I'm trying to like stuff who I am inside.
Agreed. Yeah.
And it's easier to pretend you're something you're not when you're drunk. But you're right. It wasn't until I dove into recovery head first that I thought, recovery is all about unpacking our secrets and unpacking the things that we ran from and looking at them and evaluating them and feeling them, as you said. And so I started to really look at my relationship history. And at this time I was still trying to date men. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm bisexual. Like, maybe I like both. And it quickly was obvious for me that no, I had been in therapy. I had been talking to some people that I trusted about it. And then when I was a student at Penn State, I found this like support group for questioning young people.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Because like we didn't have those resources when I was younger. So to be at a campus and have this like queer woman running this group. And I remember walking in, there was like all these other queer women or questioning women. And I was just like, oh my God. And I just felt like I fit in. And so then I knew, like, no, I'm not bisexual. I am definitely 100% gay. And then I came out of the closet because it was really important for me to not have secrets.
Yeah.
That was really important to my recovery. I still, to this day, I don't have secrets. I don't like secrets. I don't keep secrets. I am who I am, and you're going to know everything about me.
Yeah. And in that, I mean, you did get married, you did have a baby, or your son who's 7 now. You guys have since split and you've started a new relationship, which is super cute to follow. Like you guys look so in love. You're so cute.
Yeah, like a little schoolgirl in love. Yeah, I was with my ex for 12 years and we adopted our son Victor. he came to us as a foster child at 6 months old. And then we also have a daughter who came to us at 16 years old. So yeah, that marriage kind of ended. And it took a long time to just kind of sit in therapy and process through that. And then I put myself back out there, and I really didn't think that there was going to be another love chapter in my life. Very
Right.
honestly,
Right.
really, it's just kind of like, oh, I'll just date just to kind of see. And then I met this person, and I'm like stupid in love. So there you go.
It's cute though. I love it. I love love. I'm like so in love with love.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty incredible.
but
She's
what
awesome.
but what's cool about that is, I mean, like in your story, you do talk about you did get pregnant at one point, and ended up having an abortion, and had a pretty negative experience with that too, with the people that were a little bit more religious.
Yeah. So when I was 19, I was having sex with a drug dealer because it was easy and it was accessible. And he had already had a baby coming on the way, and I got pregnant, and I knew right away because so I had been a vegetarian almost my whole life, and I was working in a daycare at this time. And I remember one of my coworkers bringing McDonald's in, like a cheeseburger, and I remember like ravenously wanting that cheeseburger. Like I was like salivating. I was like, this is messed up. And after I got off work, I just like found myself in the drive-through of McDonald's, and I wolfed down a quarter pounder with cheese. Again, had never eaten meat, had never eaten steak, especially like not beef, chicken, turkey. I messed around with. So I immediately went to CVS and got a pregnancy test because I was like, this isn't right. And my body was obviously starting to crave iron, which happens. And sure enough, like it lit up like a Christmas tree. So when I first went to the doctor, I told my dad and my stepmom right away, and they were good. I mean, it wasn't a great conversation. They were good. And my dad took me to the doctor, and basically my dad had said to me, like, you're going to have an abortion. Like, this isn't an option. And it felt like the right decision. Like, I knew I couldn't have that baby. I knew if I did, it would have just altered the course of my entire life. And this guy was a loser, and I didn't want to have his child. It's like everything was was horrible about it. And so I went to the clinic, and I was too far along to even have the procedure. So they had to book it out, and then we scheduled it. But yeah, when my dad took me, then he took me for the abortion. Um, there was like all these picketers outside, like you still see, unfortunately, today. And we had to walk through. My dad had to like kind of protect me because people were just screaming at me that I was going to hell and I was hateful and I was this horrible person. And it was a horrible, horrible experience, truly. And it was 150% the right decision for me. I
Mm,
don't question really. I rarely even think about it, to be very honest. And I knew that when I was meant to have a child, that child would come to me in the way that God needed that child to come to me. And my
right.
son came to me very much in this beautiful, wonderful way. And
Mm,
he's the son I was put on this earth to raise, for sure.
yeah, that's beautiful. And like you would think he was your son by pictures of you too. Like he actually
He
looks like
looks just
you.
like me and my ex-wife, which is
Yeah, it's
wild. Like
crazy.
everyone thinks one of us gave birth to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always tell him, I was like, you were carried, by someone else, but for me.
Yeah,
Like
that's
yeah,
beautiful.
for
I love
sure.
that. I love that a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was just thinking about as you were talking about the picketers, you are someone that speaks out about injustice a lot. And it's interesting to me because I think of like all of us in long-term recovery that try to like give back to the community, do it in a way where we take our hurts and we try to use them to fuel us to do something better. Do you feel like any of those kinds of experiences are something that fuels you?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know I wouldn't be who I am today without them. Not to say that I'm like grateful for them, because no, thank you.
Right.
And I was able to take these like really horrible things that happened to me, and I was able to channel them in a way that allows me to help people. And there's that saying, hurt people, heal people.
Mm,
And as got healthier and healthier, and as I healed myself, it felt like a responsibility to help other people.
mm,
And When I found my voice, so I spoke out about my sexual violence for the first time as a student at Penn State at a Take Back the Night event. And when I spoke and was able to kind of give voice to what I was experiencing, and then later on, I came out on the steps of Old Main during a national coming out day rally. Like those experiences of speaking and sharing my story were so invigorating to me. Like they fueled me in a way that nothing up to that point had. And
Right.
so really, like I love it. And I think for so many people, speaking out is one of the most scariest things you can do. I mean, public speaking, I think, still is the number one fear of most people, and it's not a fear of mine. It's for whatever reason a gift of mine,
Mm,
and I don't mind adversity. I don't mind speaking out. I don't mind calling out injustices. I like it. I want to do that. I have the ability to do that. I don't fear reprisal, and I've had a lot of it in my life. Trust me, because I know I'm doing the right thing. If I'm speaking truth to injustice and I'm speaking truth to power, then I'm doing the right thing. And if I suffer consequences, then so be it, because the benefits far outweigh the consequences. I mean, I spoke out about sexual violence way before most people were. I mean, it was in 2008. It
yeah.
was like really on the national scope. It was like me and Mackenzie Phillips. Like
Yeah.
to the point that I was getting phone calls from the Rolling Stone magazine, from E Online, from like these major outlets, and I was just like this person,
Yeah.
but I was speaking publicly about my sexual violence, and there weren't that many of us that were willing to do that.
Right. For me, that was one of the most beautiful parts of the book because like I didn't feel like anybody understood because people didn't talk about it back then. And one of the purposes of the Real Recovery Show and one of the reasons we've started it is because people need to have real talk about real recovery. And we're not just talking about drugs and alcohol. We're talking about PTSD. We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about the LGBTQ community and the way and we're talking about abortion. We're talking about all the things that people don't talk about because it's so important to have that voice. And I am someone that gets terrified when I speak publicly, and so like having this outlet where I can do it in a studio is a little bit better for me personally. Um, yeah, and then we get to like, have great people on the show that are doing great things. So you were talking about the curriculum earlier. I know that you have like it out a little bit and you're using it to help people of sexual abuse, victims of sexual abuse. What more can we know about that and what more can we do to help you with that?
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like for so long, and even to this day, our systems are bifurcated. So if you have substance use disorders, there are these like options, right? And there's this whole system of care over here. And then if you're a victim of sexual abuse or sexual violence, there's this whole system of care over here. And rarely are they intertwined and interconnected. And
Mm-hmm.
they need to be, because the issues are intertwined and interconnected. Over 98% of women entering treatment facilities have untreated sexual violence
Right.
histories, and it is at the core of why they're using. And even though like we're starting to make these connections and the Me Too movement kind of helped, we still yet don't have the treatment modalities that are accessible enough. Like we have good treatments, like EMDR therapy is incredible. We've got some really good treatment modalities, and yet they're still not making those connections between the substance use and sexual violence. And for me, coming from the victim services world, I want stuff to be free and accessible. Like when I
Mm-hmm.
was looking to see what programs exist out there that are treating both at the same time, right? Science actually and research used to tell you that you had to treat the addiction first, because
Right.
if you treated the trauma at the same time, it would be a trigger for the addiction and the person would relapse. We now know that that is bunked. It is not accurate, and you have to treat them both on a parallel path,
Mm-hmm.
because they are codependent on each other, right? And so if you don't treat one without the other, abstinence is only going to last for so long. I talk about like abstinence is putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. Eventually that band-aid is going to fly off and that wound's going to come gushing out, because it needs treatment. It needs to be
Mm-hmm.
healed. And so the only programs I could find were like these really bougie, very expensive places. And even then, they were really just dealing with PTSD, not like sexual trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote the curriculum, and I wanted I want to work with rape crisis programs. I want to work with victim service programs. I want to work with drug and alcohol programs, to integrate it into their service delivery so that there is a resource that is free and accessible for their clients. And so the way that I've been able to do that so far is partnering with agencies, writing grants, because it's really just an extension of the services that they may already be providing in their state or their county, but it adds this augmentation. Where I really want to start to get into is drug courts and treatment courts, because you have this captive audience that is court mandated to, abstain, and yet they're not getting that holistic treatment that's going to help them heal those wounds and those reasons why they drank. So that's another area I really want to kind of get into and see if I can get some courts to actually like mandate the program.
That'd be awesome.
So a train the trainer program, so folks can reach out to me. They can, I can provide the curriculum, they can look at it. I'll come in, I'll train all of their staff, either virtually or in person. And if they want, and I have the capacity, there's also the ability to kind of pay me to come in and run the first group, so that the staff can see me do that. And that way they can kind of get more of an in-depth understanding. And I make myself available to anyone who licenses the program and contracts with me for the program. I make myself available for technical assistance through the course of their delivery of the program. So.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That's all phenomenal stuff. That's cool. With that, so people just contact you directly, or do you have a email address or anything like that?
I do. So my website is jenniferstorm.com. And my email is the same, Jennifer Storm, but it's 119. It's my sobriety date, November 11th or November 9th.
November 9th, yeah.
It's at Gmail. So jenniferstorm119@gmail.com. And then my website is just jenniferstorm.com. And there's a whole section there about the curriculum. I'm also on Instagram. I post a lot on Instagram, and that's Blackout Girl Author. So people, please find me, follow me. Like I said, I just posted my first reel about the curriculum today. So that's up. And I post a lot of information there, and then also on Facebook.
Very cool. Was there anything else you wanted to add with us today?
I don't think so. I mean, just thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. Anytime I speak and I talk about these things, I know there's somebody out there listening who's currently struggling. And so I want you to know that I see you, and that there is hope and there is healing. And to please just don't give up. Don't give up on yourself.
I will say you're one of the first people I ever felt saw me. So I can attest to that. Like, for real. I do. I will never forget that time we spent in Vegas and Genesis in 2008. It's crazy that it's that long ago, but yeah, very cool. And we do have Blackout Girl and Awakening Blackout Girl at the Recovery Store here in Las Vegas. So if you are local and you need them, or if you want to get them from the website, you can do that. You can also get them from Jennifer. They're great books and great resources. I'm just so happy for you. I'm so happy that you're in love again. I'm so happy about you and your kids. I'm like, it's just really cool to be on this journey and see people along the way and, reconnect with them and stuff. And so I really appreciate you being on today. And thank you guys so much for joining us today on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio, here in Las Vegas. Thank you so much, Lisa, for letting me do this episode. I really appreciate it, and we will see you guys next week.